Good afternoon, everyone. Please confirm if you can hear me and also see my screen.
Yes, we can hear you and you can see your screen. Good afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you, Adebisi. All right. So we'll be proceeding from where we left off last week. And during our last session, we went through a couple of items. Thank you, Aishat, for that. We went through a couple of items during our last session, and we stopped around getting requirements from our stakeholders, right? We prioritize the requirements using must call, right? Must have, should have, could have, won't have, right? And must have, if we remember correctly, are those requirements or the shopping list that those items on the shopping list in which we must have in our solution. Without it, the solution is of no value to the stakeholder, right? So that's our must have. So without those requirements, we can't even go out with that solution or present it for our end users to start using, right? And should have are those requirements that yes, we might not um, put them in the solution at the get-go, at the onset, right? Because we can still solve for it one way or the other. There's a workaround for it. So we can decide that, oh, this requirement, it's when we are updating the application, that's when we add it to it, right? That particular feature. So for example, you have let's assume that you're creating a loan request app, for example, application, right? And you've created the interface in which users can request or submit a request for a loan, right? Request for a credit facility. So there is another feature that you've created for the admins, right? That the system should auto approve those loan and disburse those loan, right? So your must have is the submission of those requests. Number one. Your should have is that yes, I don't necessarily have to have auto disbursal before I launch with that product, auto approval of that loan, automatic disbursal or crediting the customer's account with that loan. I can have someone in-house, right? Receiving those requests, reviewing those requests manually, approving it, then crediting the customer's account and sending email to the customer. So that's a workaround, right? It's still a should have. So that's where your should have comes in. You don't necessarily have to start with your should have, but you have to solve for it as time progresses, right? So later on, we can include the feature that our system can auto review that request, whether to grant the loan or not, right? Then probably in our third release, we can now make the system to be able to disburse the loan directly automatically without human effort to the customer. So those things are your should have, right? There are requirements. If not directly met by the solution, there's still a way that you can solve for it, right? But they are very important and they are crucial to the overall success or efficiency of the system. So you should have it, but it's not a must have, but you should have it if you want a quality solution, right? So those are your should haves. Then could haves are those requirements that you can like leave them out of the increment under development, right? You can easily leave them. You don't necessarily want to have them. Is a could have, right? They are mostly around enhancement, right? Improving the overall satisfaction of the application. So for example, let's imagine that once a request come in for a credit facility or a loan, right? You'd have an email sent to the admin that admin, you have two pending request, right? The admin receive an email or an in-app notification on the admin portal, right? When customer submits a loan request. Now, this particular feature of notification is a could have, right? You can easily leave it out. It does not affect the overall process of the loan request, but it's an enhancement feature in which that we with you having that particular feature in place, it enhances the overall output of the whole platform, right? Meaning that if I have notification system in place, in-app notifications, email notifications for the admin, then it's easier to prompt the admin and you don't have requests unattended to because the admin is prompted and they know when to go into their system and approve request or review request or whatnot. But without this solution, also the admin can still log into their portal and approve request, review request, right? So that in-app notification feature, right, is a cool down. You can easily leave it out of that increment under development. You can look at it in a feature time, right? But it's a cool down. Some people call it nice to have, right? So any feature that is a nice to have, you term it as such. So another example of your could have is, let's say, your dark mode and your light mode, or light theme and dark theme, right? Remember, some application, you can put it on dark mode or you can put it on light mode. This application just increase this particular feature increase the satisfaction level, right? Customization of overall user experience. It doesn't impact the functionality, the actual functionality of your application. For example, your banking app. If your banking app has a light mode or dark mode, the light mode or dark mode does not influence the overall functionality or the important or crucial functionality like transfer, right? Like the major thing for you to be able to transfer, make payments, receive payments, right? Or debit and credit. So that debit and credit is your must have, right? Adding loan feature on it or adding being able to like investment feature on it. Those are should have, right? Your could have is like a light and dark theme, right? Personalization, choosing different skin color for the application, or you being able to upload your personal DP, right? Those things are could have. Then your won't have are those things that you've agreed that we won't be considering it in this release, probably due to the cost of it, the time that is required to implement that particular item, or even whether the technology or the organization is not matured enough for now, right? So someone has the wish to include AI in maybe granting loan credit, right? Or checking our eligibility, whether we are eligible for 5,000 or 10,000, right? Someone wants to include AI because probably the cost of that, the time it will take to implement that and whatnot, you just tag those requirements as won't have, right? And you provide clarification to the stakeholder. Stakeholder would also have agreed that this will not be implemented, but we can consider it in the future when we want to move into that, right? So that's your most core way of prioritization. And remember, you don't only have most core way of prioritization. There are other ways of prioritization out there. So you can, we have Eisenhower prioritization matrix. You can check that on your own end, how to prioritize. Is anyone having issue of hearing me also? Someone just commented on the chat. Probably it's your network, but I need to confirm. Can everyone else hear me clearly?
We can hear you clearly. Maybe it's our network.
Yes, sir. We
Okay,
can hear you, sir.
great, great. Okay, I just needed to confirm that. Thank you for the response. So, like I was saying, there are other method of prioritization. So there's an Eisenhower prioritization matrix where you have your X and Y axis. Let me just try to simulate it on here. Eisenhower matrix will prioritize based on what? urgency and importance, right? Let's call this part importance I, and this axis urgency, right? So this is increasing importance, right? Increasing urgency that way. Now, Eisenhower matrix will have 4 quadrants within it. Your item that fall, let's say this is not important, the bottom part to important, and this part is from not urgent to what? Urgent, right? So any item that is not important and not urgent will fall into here, right? Let's call it quadrant A, right? Any item that is not urgent and important, we know how to do this, right? It's like a 4-figure table, or what do you call it? Mapping items, right, across. So if it's important and not urgent, it's going to form here, right? Quadrant, let's call it B. In your important and urgent, it's going to fall here, quadrant C, right? And your not important but urgent is going to form here, quadrant D. Now, how do you prioritize using this stuff? So let's start from something that looks like must have, right? So when you have items that are important, it's very important to the business, it's very important to do it. And the urgency is also there. We must deliver it now. It's a thing of value. Customer has been asking for this feature, right? So those items fall into this quadrant, the quadrant C, important and urgent, right? And that is what Eisenhower will tell you to what? Do now. So let's say do now, right? So you must have it. You must do it now. That's what Eisenhower says. Then if you have important but not urgent, that will fall into which of the quadrants? Important but not urgent. Which of the quadrants is that?
Quadrant B.
Awesome. Quadrant B. So something is important, but it's not urgent. So Eisenhower will tell you to plan for it. You plan for it. Why? It is important. Yes, we know it's important. Must we do it now? No, it's not urgent, right? So you plan for it. So peradventure, you want to work on a project. So you might say, okay, this thing is important, but I'll plan for it. I'll have to do it later. So that's more like your what? Should have, right? It's very important, but we can do it later. We don't have to necessarily do it now, right? So we plan for those items, right? Now, if you have items that are not urgent and not important, right? That will be quadrant A. This item is not urgent, it's not important. So what do you do with those items? You avoid those items, or you discard those items. Avoid it completely. It's not urgent, it's not important. They are called time wasters, right? And that is the same thing as your won't have, right? They are time wasters. This thing is not urgent. It's not providing any value to the business for now. So you avoid it. Now, we have the last quadrant, which is this D quadrant, which is not important but urgent. It is not important, but it requires urgency, right? So what Eisenhower will tell you to do is that you delegate it out, right? You must do it now, but it's really not important, right? It's not providing one big value. So things like this might be, sending email to someone as a reminder or something, right? You can delegate it to another person to work on it for you, right? That is Eisenhower prioritization matrix, right? It's a 2x2 matrix, prioritizing things based on importance and urgency. All right. Okay. So another prioritization metrics out there, you hear the $100 test, right? You can hear that also, the $100 test. And what does that mean? $100 test means something like Because stakeholders are the one that actually determine what is, because at the end of the day, your stakeholder will determine what is important to them, right? They know the value of those items. Remember, you are a business analyst bridging the gap between the business and the technology team, right? So your business know what is of value, what is paramount to them for now, right? So you want your stakeholders to weigh in on your prioritization of those requirements. Which of those things on our shopping list, right, is really important to them for now? So you are going to use $100 test, and it's simple like as this, right? You give probably, let's just assume we have 4 stakeholders, right? Our stakeholder A, our stakeholder B, C. This thing might not just be clean because I'm using my trackpad. I'm trying my best as much as possible to write this. All right. So we have those stakeholders, and these are requirements. Let's say requirements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, right? So we give each stakeholder $100. So it's just like a fictional $100, and we tell them to spend it on the requirements based on the value. So stakeholder A might say, oh, I'm giving this particular item $1 $50, item 2 $2, item 3 $1, item 4 maybe $21 or something, right? So they do that. Stakeholder B will also do his own, stakeholder C will do his own, stakeholder D will do his own, right? At the end of the day, when all of them have distributed or invested their $100 completely, right, they must use up the whole $100. Now, for you as the business analyst, you now come to do like summation, right? So for requirement 1, you add what stakeholder A, B, C, D have together, right? Have invested in that solution. So if we save probably 50 plus 10, that's 60, plus 5, 65, plus another 15, that's 80. So 80, requirement 1, 80, right? So you do that for each requirement until you get to the last requirement. Now, based on this, let's assume we have 80, 60, 15, 15, 25, and so on, based on all those requirements, right? You now select which one is of most priority. So it's just like you doing the rank, right? From the highest to the lowest. So those items with the highest figure becomes your high priority, while those items with the lowest figure becomes your very low priority. So you implement based on the order of priority, right? That is what the $100 test say. But in all of this prioritization of your shopping list, that is of those requirements that you've gotten from your stakeholder, what they need, what they desire, the new way of working should be like. In all of the prioritization, right, some things are considered in whatever you are doing. So you have to consider the cost of implementing those items, right? Cost benefits. So if I'm spending, say, 200 million to implement something, and the benefit at the end of the day is, say, 20 million, it doesn't make sense, right? So if the cost outweighs the benefit, people don't usually go for those items. They deprioritize those items, right? The only time they prioritize those items are if those benefits are somehow intangible. There are intangible benefits that are crucial to the success of the organization. So sometimes you see some organizations go all out just because they want to increase brand awareness, right? They want more people to know their brand. Some people go all out just because they want to increase their brand perception out there, how people perceive their brand, right? That, oh, this is a good brand, right? So sometimes people will spend more just to create that for themselves. So they are looking at the long-term benefit. Another thing to take into consideration when you are prioritizing is any legal requirements or regulatory requirements, right? So if there's any legal or regulatory requirements guiding your field, right? For example, if you are in the health field, if there's anything that, say, regulation like, let me just use NHIS or something, or let me say, if you're in the food processing company, right? Any regulation that NAFDAC have provided, or if you are in fintech or banking, any regulation that CBN has provided, right? You would have to consider those first, right? In fact, they become your must-have because they are legal or regulatory requirements. For you to continue operating in that space, you have to, right, succumb to those rules, right? So anything legal or regulatory requirements, you give priority to that. And another thing people consider is based on the value, right, to the end user. So this one is the normal thing that we consider value, right? The value at the end of the day. So if things are of high value or high priority to the business, probably in terms of their bottom line, that is the Naira and Kobo, their income at the end of the day, right? Cents, dollars, and all of that. You place priority on that also, or anything that is going to either earn you revenue, increase revenue, or save cost. Meaning that at the end of the day, once we implement this, we are saving cost, right? For example, you want to change the way you do leave request, leave approval, right? People are requesting for leave within an organization. They probably have to fill a form, take it to their supervisor to sign, then to the HR to sign before their leave is approved, right? Then you automated it. Oh, let's do email. So you have to do away with paper, right? That's semi-automation for now. You use email-based approval. You send an email, your supervisor approve and all. So you taking out that use of paper actually save cost of purchasing paper, purchasing ink for the printer, and all of that, right? So that's cost saving. That's a source of value or income to the organization also. So these three items, always consider it whenever you are prioritizing requirements, right? A requirement that you think that could have or can rank low when you do your $100 test, right, can become a must-have when you figure out that it's a regulatory requirement, right? So you move it up to must-have based on the condition that is a regulatory requirement. Is that pretty clear? That's clear, right? Simple and straight to the point. So, with the assumptions that we all understand prioritization, I'm just like buttressing on our last class because you really need to understand this prioritization. So, with the assumption of that, we demand that after you've done all of that, documented the requirement, prioritize it, you get your sign off from the stakeholder, right? Just like a binding contract that this is what we want. And it will also help us to avoid the scope creep, meaning that you don't just keep changing those ingredients or that list or that requirement anyhow, right? Because we have a contract, before you can add more things to it, you would have to go through some level of process. Like we'll review what you want to add to it, we'll determine the impact on the overall solution that we are creating, right? Once we see that, oh, the impact is not affecting our time or it's not affecting the cost of the entire project, or we have to do with it for now, it's a regulatory requirement. After assessing it, then we can now approve to include that change into the existing contract, right? So it will help us to avoid the scope creep. Scope creep is like doing things outside of scope, right? Of what was initially agreed upon, right? So it will help you to avoid that. And I mentioned us to go around researching for scope creep. So today we are going to move into process design. Right? After you have your requirements, what you want to do as a business analyst, right? Now you've been able to get those requirements, what they need. Now you have to do solutioning. Solutioning means providing solution to those problems or the opportunity that you are trying to tap into, right? And business analysts often engage it from process design. But the ideal thing is this. What you want to do is understand where we currently are, right? As of today, this is what we can do. We manually disburse loan. We'll give you a form, you fill the form, and we'll disburse loan to you, right? Manually. That is where we are. Where do we want to be? That's our future state, right? In our future state, we want you to be able to go on our application, request for loan. The application will auto determine the amount that you are eligible for based on your income, and auto approve the loan if it sees that this person is a good customer or is a good has a good record, right? It will auto disburse the loan for you and auto track your repayment of that loan, right? So that's where our future state is. Now we've described the current state and our future state. What a business analyst now does is that, remember, your current state is what currently happened, right? So you sit with your stakeholder, you understand their current process, you document it, map it out. Then the future state are those requirements. How do you want the future state to be? This is what we want: auto approval of loans, auto disbursal of loans, submission of request online. Those are those requirements, right, that you've prioritized, right? Those are the things around your future state. A business analyst will now sit down to analyze the gap between the current state and the future state, where we are now and where we want to be. I will try to understand the difference. Okay, where we are now, we are currently using paper to collect your loan request. Where we want to be, we want to be able to collect your loan request on system. So the gap there is manual filling and submission of loan request form. That's the gap, and that is that item I'm going to try to solve for. That gap, I'm going to try as a business analyst to ensure that that gap, I resolve it so that we can move from our current state to the future state, right? That manual filling of form and submission of loan request, right? So that is what I want to solve for. Now, because we usually tackle solutioning from the point of gap analysis, right? For us to do that efficiently, over the years, business analysts or the trade has come up with process design. Remember, everything has process. Even you logging on Teams, on Zoom call today, you went through a series of steps to be able to get here, right? So that process is possible for us to determine the current process that we have and the future process, that is the future way of working that we want, and analyze the gap, right? So process design is used to develop efficient business practice. Why? Because you can see end-to-end of a process and use it to determine where the gap is to achieve our future state, right? So what is process? It combines objective of each department in a business to create repeatable set of instruction, make it run efficiently. So what they are trying to say is this: in process designing, right, all those objective of a department or a unit within the organization, everything that they want to do, their business steps, what they do in that department, you create a repeatable set of instruction to go through it. So, for example, if you want to fry plantain, you can create a repeatable set of instruction on how to fry a plantain, right? That if people follow that step day in, day out, they will successfully fry their plantain. And that is what is called process design. You've designed a process in which they can create, they can run on it repeatably and ensure that they run efficiently at the end of the day, right? So that's process design. Now, we are talking about process design because we need it for us to be able to map, right, the steps that are repeatedly being followed for our current state, and also map the steps that will be repeatedly followed for our future state, right? Our future state of work that we desire, right? We need to be able to do it. Hence, the essence of understanding process design, right? So when you want to design your process, you ask some questions like, what are your key inputs? So for example, to fry a plantain, what are the inputs to frying plantain? You would have to have the raw plantain available. You'd have to probably have your fry pan available, have your oil, have your gas in your gas tank, have your either a burner or whatnot, right? So those are the inputs that needs to go into it, right? Before you can do whatever you need to do to get the output, right? What are the main outputs? The main output from this process would typically be the finished fried plantain, right? I'm using an example, or is something that is much more relatable to us so that we get the concept, right? So we'd probably get fried plantain, we'll get used oil, used pan, right? You can't say used gas. Probably those outputs are non-tangible, right? So where does the output go to? At the end of the day, probably the fried plantain will have to go into a plate, then to the dining. The used oil would have to be covered somewhere or be stored somewhere or be discarded, right? So you know where your output goes, right? What generates the process? What triggers the whole process, right? So the trigger can be desire to eat plantain, right? So you have to understand what triggered the whole process. For us to trigger this whole process, so if we're looking at it in terms of loan, what triggered the whole process? What triggers this is that someone is in need of what? Finance or cash or capital, right? So it triggers the whole loan application process, right? What decisions are made in the process? So when you decide to go with oil, the different kind of oil, probably you use vegetable oil. Some would say, oh, I'm going to use coconut oil. Would say I'm going to add salt, or I'm going to salt my plantain, or I'm not going to salt my raw plantain. Some would say I have to dice in um, probably some level of onions into the oil before I fry and all of that to give it taste. So decisions are being made along the overall process, right? Now, who performs each of those activities? Who is the person that is going to perform the activity? Probably in the case of plantain scenario, it's one person, right? And in the case of a loan request, we are going to have multiple people performing different activity. The customer is going to request for the loan application. Probably the admin will be back and reviewing the customer's income account and everything. There will be another system to disburse the particular loan into your account or credit your account. All of those things, those are who perform each of those activities, right? Number 7, who are the suppliers of the process? So all the items that we are using for this process, who are the suppliers, right? Who supply those items? So you might be looking at stakeholder being the suppliers, creating the system, creating the enabling environment. Probably in the case of your plantain, probably we can say your mom supplied the plantain, supplied this, supplied that, right? So that's our supplier, our identified supplier, right? Who are the customers of the process? Your customer will be like the end users of the process. So those mouths you have to feed with the plantain would be your customers of the process, right? Now, what sequence are the activities performed in it? You will now go into the sequence from your start to your end, right? You get your plantain, you dice the plantain, you salt the plantain, you put your oil on into your pan, you put the pan on the gas burner. So you go through that step one by one until you get to the end. So those are the sequence of activities that needs to be performed in it, right? So for you to effectively do process mapping or design a process, which is process designing, right? You need to be able to understand or answer this question either in a formal way or informally, mentally. You should have answers to all of these questions, right? So now, in the ideal world of business analysis, we have some tools that we can use to make this process much more efficient for us, right? Because in real world, the mapping of this process or steps or activity is usually complex and messy. So you need an approach to process the design that first let you clearly see what is happening. Because we want to move from our to-be state to our future state, right? From our we want to move from our assist state to our to-be state. Assist means as and I, right? Those of us that are not familiar with those terms, let me just quickly do that. So we have the assist state. That's the current state, right? Our current state, what is this? Just have to work this. That's the assist state. And we have the to be state. So we call it to be like this. for those of us coming across the term for the first time. So your assist is your current state as you are. To be is your desired state, right? So for you to clearly see what is happening, right, and think about how the situation could be improved, for you to clearly see what is happening in your assist state, right, and be able to clearly think of how to improve that solution to get it to the to-be state, right, you need a mapping tool, right, or models, different kind of models. So there are some different kind of models that business analysts typically use, and we have rich pictures, flow charts, swim lanes, use cases, data flow diagram. So we look into that, right? You use it to create your current state or your assist state. Then based on the what you've created in your assist state, you would also create your to-be state, right? Then you analyze the difference, the gap in between your assist and your to-be state, right? So you can use any of these models to do that. And we'll look at that even as we proceed. So let me go on to the next slide.